Hey, everybody. This is Bad at Keeping Secrets. I'm Carissa. And today I'm talking with Tim Belonax. Did I do it? I fucked it up.
You did it great. You did it great. Perfect.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Anyway, I've known Tim for maybe 12 years, something like that. We met sort of in the small publication and Riza world, the print world, but Tim is someone I've always been hugely inspired by. I guess we should maybe start out with, so right now you're the design director at Pinterest, but I think when we met, you were working at the Facebook Analog Research Lab,
That is
right?
correct. Yeah.
But I think you studied at RISD for your undergrad, and then you went to grad school at CalArts. You grew up in suburban California, and you've also taught design at CCA. Have you taught at any other institutions that I'm forgetting?
I started out teaching at the Academy of Arts and working, being a volunteer at Interact Project, which is another great sort of educational design nonprofit.
So I think we should maybe start. I kind of like to start with the foundations of I think a lot of careers in sort of creative fields, there's not really a general sort of roadmap on how to get there and why you're interested in it. And I was curious, if you could start at the beginning with kind of what your parents did or how you got interested in art and design.
Yeah. I mean, I was a pretty quiet suburban kid growing up, and I also had pretty bad allergies, frankly, and a few other sort of health problems that kind of kept me indoors for a good amount. It's really weird. I was in a lot of collective sports, like doing little league and Pop Warner football and stuff, but then there were also extreme bouts of being inside, and so I would just draw. I would draw all the time. My dad worked at home, and so he always had just pens and some paper, and when you're a little kid, that is heaven, and you just sort of go to town. And I started drawing or illustrating stories or bedtime stories that my folks would tell, and then I ended up literally just kind of stapling them together. So I was making little zines. And then once I got into elementary school and all the other sort of grades of schooling, I would apply drawing to just about everything. And whether it's when you cover your books with with brown grocery bags and you just doodle, or it was a book report, I was certainly gonna illustrate a cover for a book report and stuff like that. And that just snowballed really until I got some hints that oh, someone could actually do this for a living, and here I am, being a designer.
So how did your parents feel about you going to art school?
Oh, at first it was, I don't know, not rough, but they didn't quite get it. My dad was big into sales. My mom held down a variety of jobs. The sort of art side of things, it wasn't until much later in life that I was like, oh, this is kind of where it came from. But they really just wanted me to have a good education, and there were some, I think, windfall moments of understanding how life could be, how one could. I think the stereotype lived with them that oh, if you're an artist, you're always starving, or if you go into any sort of creative field, it's going to be really rough. But there were two big moments. One was for my 16th birthday, through a friend of somebody else's friend, what have you. I was gifted a personal tour of Pixar. And this was really early days when they were out in Point Richmond. My dad pulled a favor with another friend who I think their son worked there, Mr. Murphy. If you're watching, thank you, Mr. Murphy. And so that was that was a big shift for, I think, both myself and my dad, because at the time I just saw drawing as, oh, if you draw, maybe you can be an animator. I didn't know all of the jobs someone could do. So that was a moment. And then I think being at the, what is it, touring schools, we were lucky enough to get invited to RISD, and my dad went with me, and we took a little video camcorder, and seeing the campus and seeing what they were all about was pretty amazing.
So how did you choose RISD? Or I feel like RISD is the ultimate goal if you want to study art in the United States. And I'm just curious, because there's all this talk about, especially with the forgiving of loans. I think RISD is, a lot of people can't go for financial reasons. But a lot of people aspire to go there. I feel like that was just the place to go.
Yeah, at the time I had no idea what it was, quite frankly. Like, shout out to my art teacher, Mrs. Irvine, that was like, maybe you should try to apply to this place. Because I had only applied to I had applied to like public schools in California. And then also just a very few amount of like private art schools, because again, that was kind of not the way the wind was blowing in terms of how my education could be. And I was very lucky to apply and be accepted. And I think what I was looking for was strong academics that was as strong as the artistic program, because I was generally a pretty decent student, like pretty good in the 4.0 range throughout all of my education and then into college. And so I really wanted to keep up that rigor and application, and that kind of challenge was something that I was looking for and something that I always look for. So that was sort of the big thing over the top with Rizzy.
So I think we'll move on a little bit faster, but I want to touch on one other thing, like with in terms of grad school, like why did you choose then to continue your education? And did you take time off? And what was the sort of thought process in there on how to kind of further your study on art and design?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first, I would say like long full-time job out of undergraduate was at a studio called Mine with Christopher Simmons. And in working with Christopher, he is an incredible leader, and at the time was teaching at CCA. He was doing a lot of the things that I wanted to do. And so in working with him over time, I would visit his critiques, and I always enjoyed being in school and just having that debate around design and art and ethics and just what have you. I just enjoy academia and those discussions. And so it was always in me, and it just sort of grew and grew and grew until maybe six years into my professional practice. It was sort of around that time to like, okay, maybe we should give this a try. And then I was lucky enough to be accepted into CalArts, which has a fantastic design program, and they have also graduated some incredible design educators. So that was something that I was really looking forward to. There were a few things I wanted to do outside of or after graduate school. One was to teach, and the other was to sort of write and publish. And one of the interesting road bumps or diversions from going to graduate school is I only finished 1 year because between the first and second year, I was freelancing at Facebook and actually stopped my studies to go to Facebook full time. But I told myself that if I leave graduate school, I still need to pursue the things that I wanted outside of it. And so I'm very happy that I did teach. I taught for 7.5 years consecutively at CCA. I still enjoy teaching, still enjoy running workshops right now with the digital situation that's going on. And I haven't been able to get back into it as much as I'd like to, but it's still in me. The other one that's sort of fallen off that I still am chasing is writing and publishing. But yeah, that's sort of how it should go.
How does teaching, well, I guess there are a few different avenues that we could go, but how does teaching impact your design practice?
It's incredibly invigorating. So when I was teaching, I tried out a variety of different times to teach, let's say. And at one point because I was also holding down, day jobs at, Facebook, Airbnb, Pinterest. And I tried teaching sort of from the 7 to maybe 10:30 slot at one point, and I was too excited by what the students were bringing in to like fall asleep at night, and it really started to impact me. So when I am in the classroom, it's incredibly invigorating to be around that kind of energy around design, because they're asking questions that maybe I have held as a truth for a long time, and it helps me, re-examine those things that I thought were true, or just build up my rationale around why something is the way it is, or how I feel about it, my own sort of personal point of view. So it really sharpens the pencil per se of the practice, and it is really invigorating. And it's also just being connected to the future of what the profession can be. These people are just starting out, and it's interesting to see the beginning of a trajectory and where people go.
I was reading recently about how it's better to go to teaching hospitals in terms of data and health outcomes, because if you have a doctor who's also teaching, they're up to date on everything, and they also have experience with them. So it's kind of like getting the best of both worlds. But I think I just want to take a moment to kind of ask you to take a step back. And I know that you weren't particularly excited about this question, but as a sort of, I'm going to go ahead and label you as a design professional, whatever that means. I was wondering if you could maybe, I spent a lot of time in graduate school thinking about the difference between art and design. And I was wondering if you could maybe define those terms or how you understand them in this moment.
How I understand them in this moment, I have incredible recency bias, I guess, around this.
Wait,
So
incredible what?
recency bias. So
Oh.
I'm reading this zine. I wish I had it nearby because I'm not going to be able to cite the author. But I got it at like Park Life the other day, and the title of it is "Art is the thing that someone didn't ask you to do," or something like that. And I think that in the traditional definitions, design is often seen as something that maybe is in service to something else. Maybe it isn't quite as self-initiated. But I think there's more of perhaps a public designation that upholds what something might be in terms of art versus design. I think it's more in that dialogue that something sort of comes through, as well as I think how a person also perceives themselves and what they're pushing out. So there are plenty of designers, I think, that have transitioned or maybe gone from like, I'm a designer to actually, no, now I just have a full art practice and this is what I do. But there are also plenty of artists, I think, that actually use a lot of techniques that graphic designers use, but they're still very much artists. And so I think it sort of goes both ways. Oftentimes when this comes up, I often ask back, like, what does it matter, or what's behind the question, in terms of the difference? Because sometimes there is like a deep-seated opinion about one versus the other. And so I think that will be my answer. Like, why? Why do you want to know?
Well, I think for me, this is something I did not think about beforehand, but here we go.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, I think language is really important in how we think about ourselves and sort of place ourselves in society. And I think that both terms have very different cultural connotations that sort of ebb and flow. And for me, I think it matters not so much like as a value judgment, which I feel like maybe in the past it did, like, especially when I was going to grad school, there was like fine art, and then there was like design, and it was definitely, there was a hierarchy in between. Right now, I don't feel like that there's necessarily that hierarchy in the same way, but I also think it's helpful just to understand and sort of keep questioning and defining what these, because I obviously value, and maybe not obviously, I obviously value design, and I obviously want to value art and want to live in a world that has both of those things. But I feel like definitions are important, and understanding our terms is integral to that. Also in communicating, I think a lot of times I think we live in my opinion, an individualist culture, where you think you're sort of operating as like a single entity, but actually there are all these like huge cultural forces that are affecting us at any given moment. And I think if we don't have a way to communicate with each other effectively, then it's harder. So for me, definitions still kind of matter. I'm not saying that like there's one right definition, but I think being able to talk about them and to share that understanding is something I value. That goes into a little bit about, could you talk a little bit about how you developed your style, and how you would define your style or style in general?
Ooh, I have to answer with another question. How would you, and there's no right answer, how would you describe my style?
Well, I think that there's a directness to your style, and you have like a utilitarian edge. I'm wondering if maybe we could, just so people can see, like in the background, kind of, can you point to a couple things that you've done? I think you have there always seems to be some sort of a tie between the concept that you're working on, and yes, exactly. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about, because I would say that we have very different styles, but there's something about, I think, our interests that is overlapping.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I think that I hope that what comes across is a thoughtfulness and not necessarily a automatic bend towards a singular solution. Like I hope that my style, quote unquote, is actually just my approach is very thoughtful, and that there is something maybe buried in there a little bit deeper that really gets people to look a little bit closer. And I think that maybe our overlap is, or at least what I hope I'm achieving in that work and how I see that overlapping with us, is this shared sense of humanity. Like what I appreciate so much about your work is that you can, with a single image or graphic, really hit at some sort of human feeling that maybe people aren't talking about, or they haven't been able to summarize in a very succinct and simple way. And I think one of the maybe superpowers of design is taking a lot of complexity and boiling it down into that one understandable thing. You know, simplicity isn't everything, but being able to make sense out of chaos is, I think, one of the things that it does really well. And I think that also, but chaos can also be a little bit of a tool as well. So sort of bringing it back to the little book I was holding up that we sort of wanted to talk about. The reward is in the process is based off of a few influences colliding, and the largest ones were between Oblique Strategies, which is a sort of an older card deck started by Brian Eno and a few folks, and then John Baldessari's Optional Assignments. He was a professor at CalArts, then I think Chenard, and it was this sort of not randomized, but really operations that really put the process in the forefront. Like the process is the thing to pay attention to, not so much the end result, because one will learn the most from it and apply one's own, I think, thinking and skills and opinions through that. And that is what I also hope sort of comes through in a lot of the work, that there is maybe it's more about the system I'm putting in place that generates the outcome or generates the work itself, not necessarily in the like highly programmatic computer way of things, but more in that conceptual way, I guess, or I hope at least.
Can you talk a little bit about, and maybe this is obvious that, and I just don't, and maybe you already said it, but why, so we're comparing the two, like the process being the reward and the outcome being the reward. Why do you think your focus is over here on the process, or why is it important? Why is that something you value? Because I think a lot of times these days we're trained to, like, I don't know if it's Machiavellian to say that, like, the ends justify the means, but, or if that's where sort of I'm sure that there are several origins of, like, it doesn't matter how you got there, it's just that you got there. And this is sort of pushing against that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is rooted in a few things. One is that I see design itself as a verb, as a thing someone does, not necessarily the end product of a thing. You can sort of sense or see the thinking in an object or in an experience because of design being used to make it feel thoughtful, to make it feel approachable, to make it feel exciting, things like that. And so in focusing on this, it is a tangential way of sharpening that process and that practice of design, in that I think that there are so many ways to sort of come at it in an oblique manner to challenge us to think a little bit differently. And I think that I'm someone that's, you know, I talked about being into school when I was a little kid and just enjoying academics. Like, having just a simple prompt can really unravel something really, really quickly. And that's why I gravitate towards work like this, why I wanted to make a sort of design per se version of it, to really hone in on that process and the excitement of going through a variety of processes.
I think for me, I think the problem is it comes down to a little bit over control. I enjoy being in flow states, and the process is normally actually like much more expanded than the final result. It can be like sort of a momentary excitement. But if you're able to figure out ways that you can enjoy the process, and sort of appreciate the nature of working through things, I feel like there's a big chunk of time that it's actually more efficient, if you want to enjoy life, to figure out ways to savor this process, and to enjoy it. I feel like, and maybe that's just reflective of this moment that we're in, when I'm saying like, what would I want? I have a daughter, what would I want her to study? And I would say, I think that probably a like well-lived life would include a profession in which you enjoy doing it, or find meaning in that profession, not just like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm going to like, no, I'm not saying that whatever your goal, but I think a good goal would be to like feel like you belong, and to feel like you enjoy how you spend the majority of your time. And I feel like putting process as a value is, I think, really important in that sort of life strategy, I guess you could say.
I agree. We spend most of our time in that process, so why not make it something we focus on and enjoy? I agree. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe living in a sort of you kind of have this, your personal practice, but then you also you work for these like sort of major tech companies, why they both sort of like are important to sort of who you are, and also in terms of like the reward is in the process, like why self-publish, and why was this important for you to put out just as you?
Yeah, I think I'll go backwards in terms of the questions. With the book, it was about not being very precious and seeing essentially how a first draft would land. You know, and there were a variety of other factors. I didn't want to go through a bidding process per se of, you know, or a pitching process for books. I just wanted it to be out there and just to be accessible. And so doing something really quickly in terms of a self-publishing was what I wanted to start out with. And I think one of the highlights of it for me was that it was actually picked up by someone I had met a few years earlier, this great design writer, Rob Walker, and he wrote an article about it for this blog, Design Observer. And he really got it. And he and I began chatting about just assignments in general, and he's a big fan. So I'm happy that I got it out there. It's just about it being out there, not necessarily the actual, you know, does it have to be published by an actual publisher, which I really respect, but I just want it to live. And then if someone wants to pick it up and distribute it more, fantastic. Like, call me, let's do it. Like, one of my first jobs was at Chronicle Books. I'm really familiar with them and the process, and they're very lovely. And so, you know, it was just about the speed and not being too precious. I was starting backwards. What was it first?
There's tech influences, Marion.
Oh yeah,
working for large corporations, and then like having your own practice on the side, and the importance of balance.
Yeah, I just see it all as me, and I think, or at least that I've gotten feedback on, is that practice that I have in general is what is, I don't know, interesting to bring into these companies and institutions. And so what I've learned over time is that there are things on the periphery that I shouldn't expect, you know, to sort of come through in a larger, you know, job. And that's fine. You know, one shouldn't place ridiculous expectations on something that might necessarily not deliver. I shouldn't expect a fish to play poker with me or something. So it's really the expanse of how I like to practice. Like, I don't think that I could, you know, teach in the way that I wanted to teach on my own completely, or within, you know, a large company. And so that's where, you know, being involved with CCA or, you know, Interact project or running workshops and things like comes in. So I just see it as my whole practice. And as you mentioned before, like, what does one's life want to be? What do we want to make it up of? And those are just part of the larger ingredients that I see helps me be me and helps me live a life that I want.
I think that going back to the sort of choosing self-publishing, or I think like for me, when I just started out, I self-published everything because no one, I really wanted to have this sort of affirmation of like a larger corporation or publisher say like, oh, we believe in this enough for you to have it. And now that I feel like I've had the luxury of being able to have done a few books with different publishers. Now I'm kind of going back to, I think, being able to self-publish if you can figure out, because it still does require a little bit of like monetary funds upfront and time, which I had when I was young. I had a lot of time, but like zero money. And now I have even less time, but a little bit of ways to be able to fund like a self-publication or self-published book. I think I really enjoy, in my opinion, having the flexibility to do what I really want to do in the format that I really want to do, not on somebody else's time frame. And also, I think it's really inhibiting of creativity if you have to think about sales and sellability being the forefront and less about how you want to, the project that you're really excited about. And I think self-publishing really offers this, there's almost like a more authentic, maybe not authentic, because I would have to define what I meant by authentic. I like having control over things and making the decisions that I want to make. And I think self-publishing, I feel like, is a lot more accessible these days, and it makes it's a lot easier for people also to get it, which I think a lot of, there are really amazing platforms that help you through doing it. I was wondering if maybe we could talk just a little bit, because we were running out of time, about how you think through making, how making helps you think.
In design, there's plenty of sketching and prototyping within that process. And I think that is one example of how thinking through making just sort of comes to life. You know, you're constantly checking your work against what its goals might be or what its audience might be. And so it's difficult. There becomes a barrier if, when I am describing one thing, when in reality, I could actually show you and it would provide a larger picture. Even for myself, sometimes I can describe something, and then in trying to visualize it, there is more thinking behind it, more clarity becomes of it, and more clarity comes from my collaborators. I think that's one of the things that I value so much about working within a company, is you're surrounded by really smart and really skilled people. And so you can bounce ideas off of each other and help them think and help you think. And it's another, I think, tool towards gaining clarity. And I think often, you know, maybe outside of more creative professions, they might not have that tool or that luxury or that ability to communicate in that way and build ideas together, or build one's own ideas through making.
What do you see? So right now, having just